Chapter 1421. Test of Strength. It's cool, I can do this. I can totally do this. No, I can't. It's a stupid idea, and all that's going to happen is breaking my own carapace into a million pieces, then incinerating them with the power of a burning star. Why would I do that to myself? Why would anyone do that to himself? For glory? No, no way. That is a dangerously Leroy-ish thought, and I won't tolerate that sort of nonsense inside my head. Get out, neurons who cooked up that poor excuse for a thought, you aren't welcome. Alright, a better reason, there has to be a better reason. Think, brains, for the family. Well, I mean, damn it, that's a lot harder to refute. I am willing to do very stupid things for my family, I have a proven track record for that, after all. In fact, I've done a heck of a lot of that since being reborn on Pangara. Maybe this is how I'll go out, ready to be reborn again as a chicken, or something. Or some sort of monstrous lamprey. Or a more monstrous lamprey. Those things are terrifying by default. Eldest, are you going to help or what? Propellant snaps at me from nearby, breaking my concentration. Hey, I'm trying to pump myself up over here. You need air inside you or something. She replies, confused. We're ants. We don't even have lungs. Get in the fight. Alright already, sheesh. It's not as if the fighting isn't hectic. The war around the platform is an absolute mess, which is what we've come to expect, I suppose, but it's especially bad on the front lines, which is where I can make the most impact. Being more durable than any other ant in the colony, with the possible exception of Leroy, I can hold better and longer than most, anchoring the defensive line and keeping others safe. Which is exactly what I was going to do, once I'd sufficiently psyched myself up. Grumbling to myself, I stand and start skittering back to the front line, still trying to summon the internal fortitude necessary for my upcoming stunt. I mean, there's no better time to try and push the limits than now, right? Things are hard, the colony is struggling, and it's going to get a heck of a lot worse before it gets any better. Before we end up neck deep in sludge, I need to know if this stuff works. Alright, it's decided, I'm going to go for it. Let's do this. Striding back to the front is fairly easy at my size, I just step over everyone, and soon enough the goop of the enemy is right in my face. It's almost impossible to attack and miss when you're on the front. Even if you don't get a monster, which is unlikely, you're going to help push back the truly endless wall of mucus that threatens to gloop out onto the platform itself at any moment. Which wouldn't be ideal, so I get to chomping, blasting acid and shooting copious amounts of fire at everything I see. I can't put my mandibles on anything directly, but at least I can use the active ability to chomp away with extended range. But that's not what I'm about. Not this time. I have a new focus, a new purpose during this particular battle. I'm going to unleash the true might of the Star Crusher. Now, is that likely to, quite literally, explode in my face? Yes. Yes it is. But I have a plan that will hopefully leave my face intact along with the rest of me. It's going to work. Maybe. I've used the new chomp attack several times since my initial attempt, and I would say I've gotten somewhat used to it. I've learned it's possible to direct the resulting explosion of power, a bit, which will help avoid damaging the platform, but even so, I'll have to stick my head off the edge, right up against the end of the safe zone to do this. Because not only am I going to use the Star Crusher chomp, I'm going to empower it with the altar. Doing so will be roughly equivalent to pumping it up to a rank 8 skill as opposed to a 7 in terms of raw power, and that isn't likely to play nice with my siblings to my left or right, nor me, in the middle. However, thanks to the mutation on the altar itself I selected, allowing me to infuse my carapace with its blessed energy and making myself more durable, I should be able to survive. Hopefully. And if I do survive, then that's another weapon we can use during the wave, which is going to get bad before the end. Nervous, I check to my left and then my right. The line of soldiers is holding strong for the moment, with the copious support pouring in from the lines behind. Now seems as good a moment as any. Pulling my mandibles wide, I step forward and activate the chomp. As I do, I use the altar to empower the ability, and then start sweating in my carapace as I feel almost all of the energy contained inside drain away. This might have been a very bad idea. Chapter 1422. Location of the detonation. Extending outwards from either side of my head, two massive mandibles of darkest light form. They stretch so far to my left and right they cover half the front of the platform. As usual, my stamina drops precipitously, but then I start to panic about just how much energy remains in the altar. There's millions of ants in the fortress at this time, not to mention all those at the very depths of the fourth, all within range of the vestibule. With so many providing their will, the altar is refilling quickly, but will it be enough? It's not like I have long. The soldiers to my left and right shrink back from the chomp, expectedly so, and I realize I really should have told them what I was going to do. Wait, they're pulling back in such a neat and organized fashion. Did Solent include plans in her formations for this sort of thing? I bet she did. Damn it, I'm not that predictable. No matter how much I wish it wasn't the case, a spark of light flares between my mandibles, and I can't help but flinch back. No, not yet. Regardless of my wishes, the light takes shape, forming a sphere that begins to expand. Already, I can feel it crackling with suppressed power, and it's going to get a heck of a lot bigger than this. Come on, it's going to be fine. I'm sure of it. Good luck, eldest. The ants tell me from their new positions, well back from the danger zone. You can do it. Work hard. If you injure yourself, I'll poke you in the eye, idiot. That last one had to be a healer. Oi, who do you think I'm doing this for? I yell back. The monsters of the fifth are surging forward now that the front line has pulled back, but in truth, I can't see them at all. The sphere of light continues to grow, rotating slowly, the glare it emits blinding me completely. It grows, and when I start praying by the mighty beard of Gandalf himself that it stops, it doesn't. If the original Starcrusher produced a sphere the size of a beach ball, this one is more like a room. With my claws dug into the platform, I can barely resist the drag effect from the mini-star, even though it isn't aimed at me. I can only imagine the nightmarish scene in front of me as the torrent of monsters and mucus filling the tunnel is sucked towards my face. Then, with ponderous, creeping finality, my mandibles begin to close, the enormous jaws of darkness closing alongside them. Fearful, I check the altar, and shudder at the pitiful seeming amount of energy inside. Come on now, a normal Starcrusher is enough to cause me serious problems, this thing is going to leave me a smoking wreck. I need more energy than this. I need it full, preferably. For the first time, I wish the torrent of will flooding through me would flood just a little more rapidly. I resolve to empower my carapace at the last possible moment, and then realize that moment is rapidly approaching. Too rapidly. The jaws swing shut with inevitable force, everything they touch is caught and dragged with them, pulled towards the star which is already beginning to crack. At this moment, I angle my head and concentrate, forcing the energy emerging from the sphere away from me, directing it outwards and away. It's not a foolproof method, but it works enough that it's certainly worth doing on the odd chance it saves my head from exploding. The screaming of the monsters, the piercing din of battle, none of it means anything to me, the only sound I can hear is the shattering of the star. With the finality of a guillotine, my mandibles slam shut. Broken beyond repair, leaking shafts of searing light, the star collapses on itself. Then breaks. I pour every drop of energy within the altar into my carapace, which starts to hum with resonating energy. The world is consumed by light, then by darkness. Hello. Did I die? Again. Come on, man. I knew I was going to get myself killed at some point, but I really thought it was going to be a gravity bomb, not a freaking chomp attack. I was still secretly hoping there might be elf girls somewhere in this dungeon. My secret desire kept locked away deep within my heart. Or maybe elf ants would be better. How would an elf ant even look? Pointy antennae. How does that make sense? We already have pointy antennae. Can you catch scent? Yes. Is this ground control? No. Moron, foolish, waste, brainless, kick, head. Now that I think about it, I am in a great deal of pain. Like, ouch! Exclamation mark. I startle back to awareness, sensation from my body returning with agonizing rapidity. Everything hurts, especially my head. I can't see. I exclaim. You don't have any eyes. Someone grumps at me. I can understand you better now. That's because your antennae are growing back. Oh, I trigger the regeneration gland and almost sigh with relief as the cold liquid sloshes through my system, repairing my internal injuries and helping piece me back together. How'd the chomp attack go? Was it effective? I ask. You can see for yourself in a minute, the healer grumbles. I'm working on your eyes. Come to think of it, the light is returning gradually. For the next few minutes, my eyesight slowly returns, and over that time, I wonder why the heck I'm not hearing any fighting. When my sight returns, I no longer need to wonder. The tunnel, the slow-moving tidal wave of mucus, the endless horde of monsters. They're all gone. Well, not gone, just not as close anymore. In front of me lies a scene of utter devastation, a massive spherical chunk carved out of the rock. Even now, hunks of molten stone drip and sizzle around the edges of where the explosion was. Holy moly. Chapter 1423. Maybe don't use this. Alright, so, lessons have been learned. You still haven't learned your lesson. I can tell the healer is attempting to give me a good thwacking, but they're so small compared to me that I can barely feel the strikes from their antennae. To really cut through the carapace, you need the force of a mother's love. After all, the thwacks of the queen are not to be underestimated. I swear. This time I've really learned my lesson. I try to assure them, but I don't think the healer is listening. She's worked up a full head of steam by this point and seems to be venting her stress. No, you haven't. I refuse to believe it. I'm still being healed, but all the while she's whacking me on the back with her antennae. I think I'll just let her work through her anger and keep my pheromones to myself for a bit. Eldest, what happened here? Advent skitters up to me, waggling her antennae in a frustrated manner. I'm pretty sure she already knows, but I'll indulge her anyway. Just a little experiment, I quip, clacking my mandibles. Rather successful, wouldn't you say? The enemy was damaged, you didn't destroy the platform and you managed to survive. This qualifies as a success where you're concerned, eldest, she says. That's hurtful. She shrugs her antennae, as if to say, what do you want me to do about it? Things could have been worse, so we can be thankful for that. Despite the power of the attack, you've really only bought the platform a few minutes of reprieve, so ultimately it's not really worth it, Advent points out. And she's not wrong either. If I'd just stood about doing my normal thing, shooting gravity bombs, deploying gravity fields, using dragon's breath and shooting acid, I'd have been in the fight for hours and hours on end, helping to hold the line. As it is, it'll be an hour or two before I can start fighting again. I wasn't going to do it again, I defend myself. I think we can safely seal this ability away until I can actually tolerate it. On the other hand, I think it's proven that I can use the carapace reinforcement to safely spam the normal Starcrusher chomp, so that's a thing. I wouldn't say it needs to get completely sealed, Advent says, prodding at my still healing antennae. Smithant has been wanting to talk to you for a while, and you aren't good for much else at the moment, so you may as well take some time to go and see her. While you're at it, why not ask if she can make a helmet that might protect you next time you try this? A helmet? Me? I'm instantly opposed to the idea. I have the most magnificent, shiny and spectacular carapace in all of the colony. Look at the deep luster and subtle sparkle of my gravity-compressed diamond. Is it as bright and glittery as normal diamond? No, it's not gaudy and forward, but dignified and reserved, a mature beauty that captivates all who see it. I would never cover it up. You want your eyes to keep on melting? Well, no, I'm starting to worry that I'm getting too used to having my eyes melt, and that's not something someone should ever get used to. Even now, fighting on the platform, it still happens fairly often. Since I use my body to cover other ants from acid and slime, I can't help but get doused, which inevitably leads to more melting of the eyes. You may have a point, I say begrudgingly. I'll talk to Smithant. Not until you're fully healed, you won't. The healer declares, trying to slap me around some more. Fine, I'm not going anywhere. I settle back down while the grumbling little ant finishes her work, only to be approached by the Templars, who gather around with somewhat ominous silence. What's wrong with you lot? I ask. You're being oddly quiet. We didn't fall into the sanctum of silence when I wasn't looking, did we? Jern scratches at his head, then jerks a thumb towards the devastation beyond the edge of the platform. Still not a god? He asks me abruptly. Still not a god, I tell him, resigned. As expected, he nods and holds his chin, surveying the damage and not listening to me at all. We felt something. When you were hurt, Alice stammers. It wasn't nice. This is interesting. You sensed something when my life was in danger. They all nod and I dive into the nave, scoping out the situation, but nothing seems to have changed in there. The golden statues continue to watch over the rest of the space, doing something, probably. Look, it was a bit foolhardy of me. I was testing something out, and I won't do it again, alright. No need to worry. For the most part, I'm totally fine. Can you guys do me a favor and help defend this platform while I heal up and talk to some people? I'll be back in a few hours, I promise. Of course, eldest, Bertrand says, giving me a comforting pat on the leg. We'll look after things here. Chapter 1424. Raising a New Power. The Chow, a mythical race of unique creatures, the first to achieve stability and peace in the era following the rending. Now, thousands of years after their fall, who can say what they were like, how they lived, their thoughts and philosophies? What would they make of the world that was created in their absence? Excerpt from The Lost People, by Shinchi. We are grateful you were able to come, the Resant. I know it's not easy for you to leave the brood chambers. It's all right. Florence is still there to care for the little ones. You were right to call me. We've been doing our best to care for the hatchlings, but we really wanted your insight and advice. The Resant had only arrived in the fortress an hour ago, but she had no time to rest. She and her fellow brood tender were busy scuttling towards the chambers dedicated to caring for the baby snails. Perhaps it was their instinct to care for young things, but once she'd heard they needed her down here, the council member hadn't even rested in her quest to arrive as soon as possible. What will be your approach? Her sister asked her. Do you want to observe the hatchlings from afar, or do you wish to interact with them? I will take feedback from the care team and interact with them directly, to gain experience as quickly as I can. This early development phase is the most important, as well you know. We can't afford to make mistakes, and we have to learn fast. As soon as we arrive, I want you to gather as many of our sisters as you can so I can talk with them. I will do as you say. When they arrived, the Resant was treated to a brief meal and cup of tea while the off-duty brood tenders were assembled for her to speak with. As she rested, she did her best to clear her thoughts of any preconceived notions. Over the time since she had been born, the brood tenders had honed themselves into an elite hatchling rearing force. Every aspect of care had been tested, investigated, measured and weighed 1,000,000 times over. The diet, the temperature, the humidity, the cleanliness, the perfect blend of auras, the teaching methods, everything was pushed to the limits to create the best possible environment for the hatchlings. After all, the hatchlings were the future of the colony. Not a single individual in the family would begrudge any effort to better rear the youth. And now, all of that expertise needed to be thrown out. The Chow were snails, not insects, nor were they monsters, but naturally born sapient creatures. There would be many differences between them and the ant hatchlings she had devoted her life to rearing. Leave no stone unturned. Examine the problem from every angle. If these young creatures would be in the care of the colony, then they would get the best upbringing the colony could muster. Anything less would shame the queens. When the brood tenders were gathered, the Resant wasted no time launching her interrogation, trying to squeeze every drop of insight from them. For their part, the tenders were forthcoming and understanding, presenting their thoughts in a detailed and easy-to-understand way. They seem excessively polite for such young hatchlings, one stated, to the other's agreement. Whenever two of them come face to face, they bow to each other before moving past. When it was time for them to eat, they refused to eat from the same bowl. Instead, they would eat one at a time, waiting until the snail in front of them had finished before starting. We switched to individual servings and that works much better. What are we feeding them? The Resant asked sharply. Are we varying the food? Times of feeding? Yes. We've been using a variety of fruits, leafy plants, ground seeds and nuts, all cooked and uncooked. Have we offered them meat? Not yet. From what she understood, normal mollusks were vegetarian, but who knew with the Chow? Clearly, they weren't carnivores, but a balanced diet could be possible. We can offer a sliver of fish, perhaps, see if it takes their interest, she mused. We must be careful of allergies, one of the tenders warned her. Of course, of course. What else can you tell me of their behavior? They appear to enjoy spending time in each other's company. They gather together often, and sleep in groups, but also tend to take time alone frequently. That's interesting. What do they do on their own? The Resant asked. They are usually still, sometimes swaying back and forth a little, sometimes withdrawing most of the way into their shells. We aren't sure exactly what they are doing, but they seem to enjoy it. As the conversation rolled on, the Resant built a picture of how the snails were choosing to spend their time. Her sisters were constantly making small adjustments to their enclosure, trying to see what sort of environment or surfaces enticed them the most, and trying to encourage healthy mental and physical stimulation in the growing mollusks. I will see them now, the Resant declared. Take me to their chamber. Of course, she wasn't allowed into the room without a thorough cleansing to ensure no outside contamination was able to enter the controlled atmosphere within the Chaw's rooms. Once that was done, she entered the space as quietly and softly as she could, all of her senses on high alert. The brood tenders had gone out of their way to try and create a comfortable environment for the young Chow. Leafy, Shady sections were vibrant with living plants, soft soil, and gently running water only a few centimeters deep, creating a warm and green space, but that wasn't the whole room. Other sections were drier, with more sandy soils and sparse plants, while others contained more decaying vegetation and logs. All of these blended together, transitioning smoothly from one to the next, with small play areas, slides, colored balls and toys scattered artfully throughout the room. It was a peaceful, relaxing space, conducive to learning and growing, which was good. Her sisters had not been lax in their efforts. And then, she saw her first chow. The little snail emerged from beneath a wide, heavy leaf, eyes atop its little stalks waving curiously as it slid this way and that. When it seemed to realize something, or someone, was in front of it, the chow raised up its body and bowed, pausing for a moment before returning to the ground and slithering around her. Curious behavior, but something else stuck in her mind. When was the last time they had cleaned their mustaches? Chapter 1425. The Mustache Song. The newborn chow each sported a mustache made of fine, long hairs that drooped down from either side of their faces, just above their mouths. They weren't particularly thick, just a few whiskers on either side, but the recent was quick to notice that the specimen before her had several small fibers stuck to its mustache. This was unacceptable. She didn't know anything about grooming mollusks, or facial hair, but it was clearly unacceptable to have the hatchlings sliding about the place while unclean. Not wanting to jump to conclusions, she slowly and carefully hunted about the space, looking for more of the chow, and noted the state of their cleanliness. Her sisters were, of course, mindful of the issue. The young snails had sparklingly clean shells, and their bodies appeared to be in wonderful condition, washed and sponged down at regular intervals. So why were the mustaches universally in need of cleaning? It's because they appear to be very sensitive about their mustaches, one of the tenders on duty told her softly. Any time we try to interfere with them, even extremely gently, they withdraw into their shells. It's been troubling us. It didn't make any sense. They were born with these fine facial hairs, but refused to let them be cleaned. The recent was troubled. It seemed they would need to consult with an expert. And so the human, Isaac, was summoned, along with his partner, Cavalant. I don't know, Isaac declared, wild-eyed. Just because I have a mustache doesn't mean I know how a snail wants to clean theirs. Any insight you give us will be valuable, the recent insisted. I refuse to believe it is optimal for the hatchlings to be moving about with filthy hairs on their faces. Isaac reached up and stroked his own, admittedly magnificent mustache. Oiled and waxed to perfection, it was his pride and joy. He had developed a full 30-minute routine aimed at caring for the skin of his upper lip and ensuring the fullness and luster of his facial hair was never less than optimal. Well, the upper lip of a human can be quite sensitive, particularly near the nose. I imagine that skin. Do snails have skin? Yes, they have a fleshy outer layer which would qualify as skin. Right. So perhaps the area above their mouths is just very sensitive, like mine. Then how do we clean them? The recent muttered, exasperated. Well, if you can't pull a comb or something like it through the hair, then perhaps soaking the hair. Or cleaning it while it floats. We will have to try something. Thank you for your time. A bewildered Isaac was ushered back to his duty while a team of brood tenders gathered together, determined to brainstorm a solution to the dire problem they faced. For long hours, they toiled over a series of diagrams and thinking tools. Fishbone diagrams, word clouds, mind maps. After all of their efforts, one among them finally struck onto a potential solution. Sisters, she declared, perhaps we are looking at this problem from the wrong angle. This may not be a problem at all, but an opportunity. Positive thinking, this was the sort of thing the brood tenders thrived on. Elaborate, the recent said. We know that in the past, the chow were capable of two things that nobody else has been able to replicate, their ability to manipulate things with their minds, and their strange singing powers. Correct, there was a general consensus on these words. This was indeed the case. The recent hadn't even begun to consider how the curriculum would need to be designed to teach the young snails skills that nobody had seen for thousands of years. We can't devise a method to clean the whiskers of the hatchlings ourselves, so perhaps we should find a way to teach them to do it. You want us to try and tap into their latent abilities to clean themselves. Hence teaching them how to control their telekinesis whilst also grooming their faces. That's right, the brood tender nodded, cleaning her own antennae nervously as all the others focused on her. It's genius, the recent declared. Get rid of all this rubbish. We start again. She swept away all of the precious thinking tools they had toiled over and the group set to work once more. They quickly ran into difficulties. The colony did not possess the ability to manipulate objects with their minds, and worse than that, they had no experience with any sort of music. In truth, they didn't have ears. Instead, they interpreted sound via the vibrations captured by the fine hairs of their antennae. As for singing, they didn't have vocal cords. None of these obstacles mattered in the face of the determination of the brood tenders. They would have a solution, no matter what. And so it was that the Rhysand, proud member of the council and eldest of all the brood tenders, along with her dear sister, found herself amongst the young chow once more, with 2 long mustaches glued to her carapace. Every effort had been made to find a convincing fake, and eventually they were sourced from a rare species of air mammoth found in the 4th stratum. With just the right hue and airiness, they drooped down just below her mandibles, but above her mouth. The hatchlings, interestingly enough, noticed the difference immediately, turning their stalks towards her and watching as the hair fluttered gracefully along with her movements. It was going well. Now for the next step. The Rhysand opened her mouth, and a single, pure note filled the room. In an instant, the chow retreated into their shells. The Rhysand panicked. Had something gone wrong? Were the hatchlings in pain? Before she could call a halt to the test, the snails began to emerge again. Slowly, they poked their heads out, eyes waving on their stalks, then a little further. They were listening. It was working. Now, of course, the Rhysand wasn't making any sound herself. They had found a capable human singer in the fortress and were projecting her voice into the chamber, but the tenders had decided the charade was worth proceeding with to limit the number of species the hatchlings were introduced to in the short term. And now, the final deception. The Rhysand raised her head slightly, and the note changed. Then, slowly, as if held aloft by magical winds, which was exactly what was happening, her glorious mustaches began to float up into the air, dancing in an invisible breeze. The little snails stared, transfixed. Then one of them opened its little mouth, and began to sing. Chapter 14:26. Helms deep upon the eldest's head. I can't make a helmet strong enough to resist a blast of those sorts of proportions. Impossible, Smithant declared. Well, no arguing with that, I suppose. Thanks for taking the time to meet with me, I suppose, I say, turning away. There's no way, she continued. Not even with the most advanced forging techniques and alloys we currently possess. With crushed living stone mixed into the furnace, or perhaps a folded lattice of, no, the temperature would cause it to crack. Which is why I told you it was impossible. All right, I say, confused. You don't need to tell me twice. If you can't do it, you can't do it. And it has to be transparent, she stressed. The whole idea is to protect your eyes and stop them from imploding. If you can't see through it, there's no point. Rather than a clear material, we would be better creating a shield over your eyes using enchanting, but the materials required, and the work would be meticulous, not durable at all, and how would it even work? The core required to power it, for a shield of sufficient strength. No, impossible. I'm not sure if she's having an episode or what. I think I'll just leave. Get back here, she roars, and I freeze on the spot. Make up your mind, damn it. I declare, my antenna twitching, sensing a moment of thwacking had arrived. I'm thinking, look, sit down over there and I'll take some measurements while I ponder. Are you going to keep telling me my request is impossible the whole time? Maybe, don't, quote. I'll try my best. So I drop into an adjustable ant chair that doesn't quite extend enough for me to sit comfortably, damn my hugeness, and wait while the smith takes measurements. Mutters to herself and is a general pest. Her workshop in the fortress isn't as elaborate as some that I've seen her in. Most of the industry in the colony is happening further up in the dungeon, after all, but it's still fancy. Smithant's workshop isn't about mass production, or even fine craftsmanship. She specializes in discovery and prototyping, and so her space is specially rigged to produce just about anything an ant could possibly think of. Much like my current request, she's the one we turn to when we need solutions to new problems. Still, the wealth on display here is something I'm just starting to get used to. Our trade with outsiders in the 4th stratum has borne fruit, and the proof is right here in the open. All sorts of crystals and metals that I'm fairly confident the colony hasn't unearthed are neatly stacked here and there about the chamber. No doubt Smithant has been working day and night, tinkering and testing to see what she can do with them. It might be possible, she declares, jarring me out of my thoughts. What? It is. I'm pretty sure you said just the opposite about 100 times. I was just thinking, don't be so fussy, she says, waving my concerns aside. With an interesting project placed in front of her, Smith Ant has come to life, clacking her mandibles eagerly, antennae waving through the air with vim and vigor. It's not going to be easy, but there are a few alloys I'd like to try, which should be conductive enough to hold the necessary enchantments. You don't need the shields to be up permanently, do you? Well, no, I suppose not. I only need them to protect me from the explosion released at the end of the Star Crusher. Or in the event an attack finds its way to my eyes. Most of the time, I don't need any protection around the ocular region. Foresight and my reflexes are usually more than enough to keep my eyeballs safe. So the issue becomes one of burst potential. We need an enchantment and alloy robust enough to allow extreme amounts of mana to flow through in a very narrow time frame. That's tough, very tough. Well, it's easy, actually. The tough part is making it so that it doesn't burn out after a single use. Couldn't you just make another one after each use? That, she snaps, would be wasteful and poor craftsmanship. I suppose you're right on that front. Being wasteful is tantamount to being selfish in the eyes of the carvers. There's no way they would stand for it. While I have you, eldest, Smith Ant goes on, I have some prototype armor pieces for you that I want you to try on. I shift, a little uncomfortably. I really don't think you can make anything better than my carapace, no offense. This is gravity compressed diamond. Also, no way in heck am I covering it up. Rude, the smith snaps, slapping me on the side with an antenna, but you aren't wrong. These pieces are for covering the gaps in your joints and come with some beneficial enchantment work. They should help make you a little more mobile than before, while also improving your mana intake. Well, that doesn't sound too bad. The weak point of any ant is the joints, specifically in the legs, after all. Alright then, let's see how they fit, I sigh. Turns out, quite well. Say what I will about Smith Ant, she does good work. Each of my legs is fitted with 2 separate ring plates. The first protects the point where the leg joins to my body, the second clamps over the joint at the midpoint of the leg, the knee equivalent, I suppose. Made of a glittering, silver-golden alloy, they look rather fetching as well. A shiny accessory that only accentuates the deep luster of my carapace. I'll have something ready for you in a few days, Smith Ant says, dismissing me and getting straight to work. With nothing else to do, I scuttle out and head back to the platform. The fight is never ending out there, after all. Chapter 1427, Platform War. As it turns out, reinforcing my carapace using the altar is plenty enough to protect me during a regular Star Crusher. My antennae take a little bit of damage, which is unfortunate since they take quite a bit of time or effort to restore to full performance. They're delicate, it can't be helped. Still, even just using it normally, my new chomp attack takes a heck of a lot out of me. The drain on my body is immense, but the will of the colony pours into me, cleansing my fatigue and easing the stress on my musculature. Even so, I try not to use it too often. I feel like my mandibles are going to start developing cracks if I use it too much. The very thought of doing a Star Crusher combo fills me with terror. Not only would it do devastating damage to the enemy, it would likely result in my head exploding. Not a fan of that idea. Considering I'm able to unleash such absurd power with my mandibles now, I'm going to have to seriously consider reinforcing my noggin during my next evolution. Not in a small way either. Making my eyes less squishy is the first step, but there has to be something I can do beyond that to help the situation. Or perhaps I just need to get better at weaving shields so I can make one when I need it. The battle around the platform is as intense as ever, and I remain in my usual position, anchoring the center of the line. With this endless war of attrition, the most important thing for me to do is manage my resources carefully. My fatigue is constantly being taken away, my healing gland being replenished, and there is a steady inflow of mana here, so I can fight hard consistently but not constantly. Draining too much mana puts me in an awkward position, as does using too much juice from the altar. Finally, the only thing that really pushes me into needing a rest, mental fatigue. Well, mental fatigue, and the torpor police guilting me into it using literal children. I'm still mad about that. Empowered Dragon's Breath is quite handy against the monsters of the 5th. They are strangely weak to fire, and also strong against it at the same time. They clearly don't like it, but are usually covered in so much slime and goop that you can't burn through it fast enough to damage them. Empowered Dragon's Breath can burn through it well enough to do some real damage, but against the literal tidal wave of mucus coming my way, I have to pick my spots. Eldest, watch out on the left. No problem, nothing a little gravity well won't fix. Empowered by the altar, the field slams into place, crushing everything within to the ground. A literal mountain of ooze and monsters is caught in the zone, but it isn't enough to kill them. The monsters of the fifth are impressively resistant to being squished, even more so when they have a river of ooze beneath them. How they breathe in that stuff, I have no idea. However, the field does an excellent job of containing them, slowing their assault enough for the ants to cover any gaps. My gravity mana gland is constantly refilling, drawing on the residual energy from my own gravity spells to provide a steady trickle atop its own regeneration rate. Pouring out a full-strength gravity well like this is enough to take half of it, so I'll need to hold off for a while to make sure I'm not caught low on energy when I need it. Eldest. They're charging the left side. Now the left side of the platform needs help. What the heck is going on over there? I dash as fast as I can to the action, leaving my previous post for a moment, and find dozens of ooze elementals rising up out of the sludge and pressing towards the platform. The ants are already tangling with them, but in seconds, that entire section is going to get covered in a wave of toxic slime belched out of the monsters. Too dangerous. Get back, I yell, opening my mandibles wide. Starcrusher. With a cataclysmic boom, my mandibles slam shut and evaporate the encroaching beasts. Of course, I reinforce my carapace with precious energy from the altar to preserve myself, which works well enough to prevent major damage. I'm heading back to my post. I yell, and the ants don't respond, leaping back into their own positions and reforming their defensive line. It's relentless out here, and I don't think I've ever fought against a wave from such an exposed position. Fighting in the fifth, it's just nightmarish. As I continue to battle, I think of Tiny, Chrysalis, Nvidia and Sarah out there, fighting on their own platforms, and I hope they're alright. I'd love to check in with my friends, but there just isn't time right now. The wave won't let up, and neither can we. Even so, I feel a little sad. Thinking of my 3 closest companions in particular makes me miss them all the more. I really hope Tiny isn't doing anything stupid. Chapter 1428. Endless Punching Bag. The wave represented many different things, to many different people. To some, it was a time of opportunity, when the wealth of the dungeon overflowed in the form of endless monsters to be harvested for cores and other components. To others, it was a time of fear and despair, huddling in their homes, behind walls and praying that others would be able to hold back the tide and keep them safe. To a privileged few, a wave was much the same as any other time. Above the danger, protected behind layer after layer of sturdy defense, these people had little notice or care for the dungeon. For Tiny, the wave was a wonderful and precious time. A time of gladness, of joy, of smiles and laughter. A season of fists. Roar, he bellowed, unleashing his fierce battle cry once more as another wave of monsters approached. Eyes filled with madness and rage, the monsters of the fifth rushed towards the platform, bursting out of the sludge river to launch themselves directly at him. Tiny's eyes narrowed. A storm of fists exploded outward, a dazzling display of light and force that struck the air with the force of a thunderclap. Some monsters were pulverized in an instant, others were pushed back, but only momentarily. Soon, they rallied, and came again with renewed fury. That was fine, Tiny had more punches to go around. He raised his hands, tightened his posture, sucked in his gut and relaxed his shoulders. To achieve the perfect punching form, there were many requirements, and Tiny was willing to meet them all. Close the fist, but don't clench it. Keep the muscles loose, lest he sacrifice speed. Rotate the body, putting his weight behind each strike, lest he sacrifice power. Stay light on his feet, rotating smoothly through the joints. Explode the hands forward, then bring them back twice as fast. When everything went perfectly, Tiny could feel it in every muscle fiber, a single chord of perfect music, a flawless artwork that touched the soul. He could see it in his mind. His fist, snapping out so fast he couldn't even see it, only feel. At full extension, there was a strain in the shoulder as the force exploded outward and he pulled at the same moment, drawing the hand back. As it returned, his shoulders rotated, his hips, his knees and ankles. The force transferred to the other side of his body, then bam, the other hand flew out to snap, then explode, then return, ready to load the other hand. In Tiny's mind, this was poetry. This was art. He danced on his feet as his fists flashed out again and again and again. When the fists of light had pummeled everything before him into oblivion and no monsters remained, the burning red light in his eyes faded and he wobbled on his feet. In an instant, the ants were there. A chair slid into place just as the giant ape fell backwards, catching him at the perfect moment. Healers appeared as if from nowhere, climbing over his arms, healing and massaging the muscles, driving away the fatigue and trying to restore some energy. A towel was thrown over his shoulders and Tiny grabbed it eagerly, wiping his face and running it over his head. The cloth came away dripping, drenched in sweat. The ants saw it, they saw everything, and soon Tiny groaned in delight as cool, refreshing liquid was poured over him, a large container pressed into his hand. He took a long drink, swished the water in his mouth, then spat it out again. A small plate of biomass was presented, and he munched it down while the healers continued to work on him, turning his attention to the general who had appeared before him. Tiny looked down at the little ant intently, ready to receive instructions from the general who had taken it upon herself to coach him in the grand battle of the platform. The general rose up and mimed throwing a few quick punches with her front legs. Tiny nodded. The general then mimicked giving him a thumbs up. Tiny nodded, and returned the gesture. More punches. Good. Not even a minute had passed, and it was time to get back into the fight. Tiny stood, rolling his shoulders and swinging his arms, letting the blood and mana flow. The chair was taken away, the towel removed and the general gave him an encouraging pat on the leg, followed by another thumbs up. It warmed Tiny's heart and he smiled broadly as he strode forward again, the endless tide of sludge and monsters rising up to meet him. Lightning crackled along his shoulders, running down his limbs in snaking ribbons of power that lifted his fur and sent sparks flying into the air. Gradually, the power built, rising higher and higher until his body almost couldn't contain it anymore. Once more, Tiny opened his mouth and unleashed his mighty war cry, daring the monsters of the fifth to come and challenge him. There were more monsters, of course there were. They wouldn't stop coming until the wave itself faded. Perfect. The great ape balled his fists once more, bounced on his feet, and let his hands do the talking. Electricity blasted outwards, searing and sizzling in the air and sludge as fists formed of pure light slammed, flattened, and fractured everything they touched. This was perfect. Chapter 1429. Hatred from the Shadows. Chrysalis hated the fifth stratum. She hated the native mana, she hated the native monsters, she hated the creepy atmosphere in the tunnels, she hated the sludge and slime everywhere and she hated the way it all ate into her flesh. But that wasn't even the thing that she hated the most. The thing she hated the most was the way she was constantly being kept from her master. Fight over here, Chrysalis, help over there, Chrysalis. Why couldn't they ever be fighting in the same place? Not that she blamed the colony for this problem, nor did she blame her master, not entirely. The cause of this problem, the reason for all her suffering, was the hideous monsters right in front her. Suffer and die for all eternity. She screamed, plunging her tentacles down into the mana-infused shadows beneath her. To her, lacking in eyes, she didn't see the filth, corruption and sludge that oozed endlessly out of the fifth stratum and crept towards her platform in an unrelenting wave. Some might say that was better, but in her mind, it was infinitely worse. She didn't perceive as others did, she perceived mana, and the mana of the fifth was simply awful, and the creatures who lived in that filth were even worse, disgusting stains that blighted her vision and filled her with revulsion. With wicked glee, her tentacles emerged from the darkness in the tunnel, and Chrysalis set to plying her deadly work. Her mind was a network of thousands of connections, each one spanning 1,000 limbs, and she orchestrated each one like a conductor. All of the targets were there, lit up in her mana sight as clear as day, and like filth-seeking arrows, her limbs writhed through the air towards them. Being exposed to the toxic atmosphere of the fifth was bad enough, actually touching the monsters was an entirely different experience. The moment her limbs grasped the creatures, they began to sizzle and hiss as the acid and slime ate into her shadow flesh, breaking it down at tremendous speeds. But not fast enough to save them. Hundreds of times a second, her tentacles wrapped around a monster and began to twist. The teeth on the inside of the limbs ground and slashed and cut, rending her foes into pieces. Other limbs sought out the more powerful monsters and drove straight into their bodies, bypassing their physical form. Soul Seeker cilia hunted inside their forms even as they melted away, sinking into their minds and letting Chrysalis set them against their own kind. The effect only lasted a few seconds before the tentacles were damaged beyond repair, but that was enough to cause devastating damage in the right circumstances. Grinding teeth in her 3 mouths, Chrysalis endured the burning of her flesh as she unleashed her fury upon the monsters of the fifth. However, it could only last so long. Not only was her flesh being annihilated, it was also being corrupted. Before the contamination could make its way back to her main body, she cut off the limbs herself, cursing savagely as so much of herself was cast away. It immediately began to regenerate, but it would take time and materials to rebuild what she had lost. For every minute she was actively fighting in the fifth, she needed 3 minutes to recover, and that ratio was only getting worse as the wave went on. Well done, the mage assistant the colony had appointed to her said. I have some gifts for you. Several soldiers delivered plates laden with biomass in front of her, using their mandibles to place them down on the platform. Thanks, Santa, Chrysalis sighed, reaching out as she expanded her form to reveal her mouths. Soon she was crunching away on the food, letting it burn away inside her and convert to more flesh for use against the monsters. I appreciate this, as always. You've been very good to the colony, so of course you get onto the list, Santa said, clacking her mandibles happily. What list? The priority supply list. Delivering biomass for you is close to the top, I'll have you know. Holding this platform would be twice as hard without you. The colony is extremely grateful. It was nice to be appreciated, but Chrysalis didn't want to be appreciated, she wanted to be with her master. The thought of him fighting on his own, without her there to keep him safe, was maddening. The thought of him vanishing and reappearing hundreds of kilometers away after being abducted in some absurd way filled her with terror. This was agonizing. Her limbs writhed and twisted without her conscious control. Why didn't he let her live inside his carapace? That way, they would never be apart and she could make sure he was safe. They would basically be one life form, a perfect existence. You've grabbed me again. Oh, sorry. Chrysalis released the mage that she'd unintentionally snatched up in her tentacles, placing her back down carefully. How is my master doing? She asked hesitantly. Nothing bad, nothing bad. Nothing bad. Very well. I inquired because I thought you would ask, again. The eldest has been fighting hard on the platform, battling away and using their new abilities to devastating effect, so I'm told. What a relief. They were severely injured recently. What? WHO dared to damage my master. Rage. White-hot rage. It was self-inflicted. The anger was snuffed out in an instant, replaced with equally intense frustration. Of course it was self-inflicted. Once more, her limbs twisted and curled. Chrysalis, you've grabbed me again. Sorry, Santa. Chapter 1430. Power of Friendship. Nvidia could see it. Even better, he could taste it. Addictive, delicious, it was a languid, warm flavor that rolled over the demon's tongue and sent shivers of joy running down his thin, spindly arms. He hadn't even known such a delicate flavor could exist, so much more complex, with so much more depth than what he had gotten accustomed to before. Now, he couldn't imagine living without it. He was captured. He was enslaved. He was obsessed. Thanks for your help, Nvidia. I really appreciate you providing those shields. Saved my bacon out there, said the human mage. Nvidia grinned broadly. We thank you for your assistance, Guardian, the Ant General said, after Nvidia had volunteered to provide artillery support. The colony appreciates your efforts. The little demon licked his lips with joy. Cheers, Nvidia. I've been trying to get my hands on a glow silver necklace like this for ages. My girlfriend is going to love it. Thanks, mate. Nvidia chuckled evilly. Yes. They counted on him. They depended on him. He was their ally, their dependable aide, their comrade, their friend. He floated in the center of the platform, his prodigious brain working overtime, twisting mana into detonations, shields, healing energy, all while lending a sympathetic ear to their worries and concerns. He was a font of sage advice, a shoulder to cry on, and a close confidant to one and all. It was delicious. This particular day was progressing much like any other. The monsters of the fifth were disgusting, slimy things, vastly inferior to demon kind, in his opinion, and he had no qualms about blasting them to oblivion whenever he could. No doubt, his master would be exceptionally pleased with his performance. Already, he could sense the gratitude rising from the battalions around him like a thick, tasty cloud. Against the wave, he had noticed just how difficult it was to work any sort of magic due to the corrupting properties of the native mana. Usually, he would have no problems reaching out and manipulating his mana at range to form the detonations that were the signature spell of the gas and fire combination. It was a technique that required extreme levels of external mana control, along with unwavering mental fortitude, which were things that Nvidia possessed in abundance. However, extending mana out into the natural environment was not conducive to successful spellcasting in the fifth. The native mana ate away at his own, corrupting and consuming it the moment he pushed it out beyond the safety of the platform. The longer the wave went on, the more virulent it became, forcing the demon to expend more mana, to exercise even finer control, and to find closer targets. Another pack of creatures advanced from within the filth, and Nvidia watched and waited. The ants were already reacting, preparing for their arrival and looking to engage as the monsters drew closer. The demon bided his time. He knew exactly, down to the centimeter, how far he could extend his magic. Managing the strain on his mind and the mana in his core were two of the major challenges. The second they stepped over that line, Nvidia pounced. Energy surged out of him and he seized the threads of power, his mind constructs buzzing like a swarm of bees as they wove and twisted the mana as it traveled towards the target. Heedless of the danger, the monsters charged, dripping with malice and slime towards the front line, preparing to disgorge their bile and mucus onto the platform. The second his mana exited the safe zone, Nvidia could feel it start to degrade as it was consumed and converted. That was fine, he'd adapted to this. He'd extended double the number of threads he would normally need for this spell. As he continued to weave, he discarded those that were too damaged, deftly seizing on his spares, reworking sections of the spell at incredible speed. In less than a second, he had it ready and triggered the magic. Boom! An explosion rocked the chamber, sending shockwaves through the air. Sadly, much of the explosive power was absorbed by the wall of slime that oozed constantly from the tunnel walls. However, he'd been on target, and the spell had flattened the approaching monsters to the ground, damaging and stunning them in place long enough for the ants and their allies to pounce. Several monsters were seized and dragged into the cleansed mana, others were bombarded with spells and acid until they were no more. But one of them regrouped, lurched forward, and compressed its body, as if summoning energy. Not goods SSS, Nvidia thought to himself, preparing to spin together a shield. His friends couldn't be hurt. It wasn't allowed, except they weren't the target. The monster, with one final burst of strength, unleashed a stream of mucus, thick and lurid green, deep into the platform, directly at the little demon. Caught unprepared, he switched gears at the last second, whipping a shield to catch the slime before it could hit him. The glimmering barrier snapped into place just in time. The ooze slapped into it wetly, chewing through the barrier even as it was consumed by the cleansed mana. Yet, he'd misjudged. The mucus was so thick that the tail end, falling short of the shield, didn't break off from the main mass, but instead swung beneath the shield like a vine, swinging straight for his head. All Nvidia could do was hold up his stick-thin arms in a vain attempt at defending himself as he braced for the inevitable. Only for the inevitable to fail to materialize. When the little demon lowered his arms, he found a human soldier, shield braced and skills active, protecting him from the errant sludge. This human had leapt into danger to save him. He recognized him. This was the human he'd procured the necklace for. Burden. Nvidia was confused, baffled. He reached out with a mind construct and felt it snap into place. Before he could even form the question, the young man looked over his shoulder at him. Hey there, Nvidia, you alright? I am SSSS unharmed. I thanks you, Nvidia replied. Burden grinned. No worries. What are friends for?